I'm Sarah Mitchell, 56, and for 23 years, I believed my husband David was a hero who died saving lives in the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. The city honored him, the newspapers called him a hero, and I raised our daughter on stories of his courage and sacrifice. But last month, when I finally applied for his long-overdue death benefits to help pay for our daughter's wedding, I discovered a truth so devastating it shattered everything I thought I knew about that terrible day. The government didn't just deny my claim, they told me my husband was never there at all. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Like this video if you've ever had your entire life turned upside down by a single phone call. September 11th started like any other Tuesday morning in our small New Jersey home. I was 7 months pregnant with Emma, moving slowly around our sunny kitchen while David rushed through his usual routine. He always left his coffee mug on the counter, a habit that used to annoy me, but that morning I just smiled and rubbed my growing belly. "You're going to be late," I called out as he searched for his keys, his tie hanging loose around his neck. David had this boyish charm that made even his scattered mornings endearing. At 34, he still looked like the college student I'd fallen in love with, all rumpled hair and crooked grins. "Found them." He jangled his keys triumphantly, then rushed over to kiss my forehead and then my belly. "Be good for mommy today, little one." That kiss, soft, quick, distracted, would replay in my mind a million times over the next 23 years. If I'd known it was goodbye, would I have held him longer? Made him stay for breakfast? The what-ifs could drive you crazy. "Love you," he called over his shoulder, grabbing his briefcase. The front door slammed, and I heard his car pull out of the driveway. I stood at the kitchen window, watching his blue Honda disappear around the corner, one hand resting on my stomach where Emma was doing her morning gymnastics routine. I never moved that coffee mug. For 23 years, it sat on that same spot on the counter, a shrine to that last ordinary moment. The white ceramic had a chip on the handle from when David dropped it years earlier, and there was a faint brown ring stained permanently into the bottom. "World's greatest dad," it proclaimed in faded blue letters, "a Father's Day gift from when we were still trying to conceive." By 9 o'clock, I was settled on the couch with my feet up, watching the morning shows and eating cereal straight from the box, one of those pregnancy indulgences David always teased me about. That's when the first plane hit. Katie Couric's voice cut through my drowsy contentment. "We have breaking news this morning. A plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center in New York City." I sat up straighter, instinctively placing my hand on my belly, as Emma seemed to respond to my sudden tension. The images on screen were surreal. That gaping hole in the North Tower, smoke billowing into the crystal-clear September sky. "Probably a small plane," I murmured to Emma, trying to stay calm. "Some kind of accident." But then, at 9:03, we all watched in horror as the second plane struck the South Tower. The footage played over and over, that silver aircraft disappearing into the building like it was swallowing it whole. This wasn't an accident. This was something else entirely. I tried calling David's office, but the phone lines were jammed. His cell phone went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached David Mitchell. Leave me a message and I'll get back to you." That cheerful, familiar voice felt like a lifeline. "David, it's me," I said after the beep, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know you're probably busy, but please call me when you get this. I just want to make sure you're okay. I love you." The knock on my door came at 11:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock all day, willing it to move faster, willing David to call. The towers had fallen hours ago, and the world felt like it had tilted off its axis. Police officers stood on my porch, their faces grave in the yellow light of our front porch lamp. Officer Martinez was young, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. Officer Thompson was older, weathered, the kind of cop who'd seen everything. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Officer Martinez asked gently. "Sarah Mitchell." I nodded, my hand instinctively moving to my belly where Emma was unusually still, as if she could sense the gravity of the moment. "Ma'am, we're here about your husband, David Mitchell. May we come in?" The next few minutes felt like watching someone else's life unfold. I led them to our living room, where the TV was still broadcasting footage of the tower's collapse on repeat. Officer Thompson turned it off with a gentle click of the remote. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but your husband, was killed in the World Trade Center attack today. The words hit me like a physical blow. I doubled over, gasping, and Officer Martinez was immediately beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not. David works in Newark. He doesn't work in Manhattan. There's been a mistake." Officer Thompson consulted his notebook. "Ma'am, according to our records, your husband was in the South Tower when it collapsed. He was helping people evacuate from the upper floors." "Helping people?" I looked up at him through my tears. "What do you mean?" "Your husband was a hero, Mrs. Mitchell. Witnesses saw him guiding people to the stairwells, going back for more. He saved lives today." The story they told me was incredible. David had been in the South Tower on business, some kind of financial consultation, they said. When the first plane hit the North Tower, instead of evacuating immediately, David had stayed to help others. He'd guided terrified office workers to the stairs, carried an elderly man down several flights, and had gone back up to look for stragglers when the second plane hit. The last person to see him alive was a woman named Emma Rodriguez, Officer Martinez said, reading from his notes. She said he told her to keep going, that he was going back for one more person. She said she'll never forget his face. How calm he was, how brave. Emma. That's how I knew the story was true, or at least that's what I told myself. The baby I was carrying. We'd been calling her the baby because we wanted to be surprised, but hearing that name, the name of the woman whose life David had tried to save, it felt like a sign. "We're going to name her Emma," I said through my tears. "Our daughter. We're going to name her Emma." The officers exchanged glances. "That's beautiful, ma'am. A wonderful way to honor your husband's sacrifice." Over the next few days, as the full scope of the attacks became clear, David's story spread through our small town like wildfire. The local newspaper ran a front-page article, "Local Hero Dies Saving Lives in World Trade Center." They interviewed our neighbors, our friends from church, people who'd known David since childhood. He was always the first one to help. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, told the reporter, "When my husband had his heart attack, David was the one who called 911 and stayed with us until the ambulance came." This doesn't surprise me at all. The phone calls started the next day. Classmates from high school, distant relatives, friends I hadn't spoken to in years, everyone wanted to express their condolences, to tell me how proud they were of David, how he'd died a hero. The local fire department sent a delegation to our house. Chief Patterson, a man I'd known since we were teenagers, sat in our living room with tears in his eyes. "Sarah, I want you to know that David died doing what every one of us hopes we'd have the courage to do. He saw people in trouble, and he didn't hesitate. He ran toward danger to save others. That's the definition of a hero." Emma was born 3 weeks later. On October 2nd, she was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and David's dark hair. As I held her for the first time, I whispered the story to her, the story I would tell her 1,000 times over the years. "Your daddy was a hero, sweet girl. He saved people. He saved a woman with your name, and now you're here to remind us all how precious life is." The hospital room was filled with flowers, cards, and gifts from the community. Local businesses had donated diapers, clothes, and baby supplies. The elementary school had sent a handmade book filled with drawings from the children, all depicting David with a halo and wings. But it was the newspaper clipping that I treasured most, the one with the headline, "Financial District Hero Dies Saving Lives," and David's photo, his company headshot, where he was smiling, confident, alive. I carefully cut it out and placed it in Emma's baby book, right next to her footprints and her hospital bracelet. This was David's legacy. This was the story that would define not just how he died, but how he lived. This was the story I would tell our daughter about her father, that he was brave, selfless, and heroic until the very end. The community's response to David's death was overwhelming. Within a week of Emma's birth, our small town of Millbrook had rallied around us in ways I never could have imagined. That it started with meals. Every day, someone new appeared at our door with casseroles, soups, homemade bread. Mrs. Patterson from down the street organized a meal train that lasted for months. "You just focus on healing and taking care of that beautiful baby," she said, pressing a warm dish of lasagna into my hands. "We've got everything else covered." The church organized a memorial service for David, even though his body was never recovered. Pastor Williams had known David since we'd moved to Millbrook 8 years earlier, and he spoke about David's quiet faith and generous spirit. David Mitchell lived his faith through action. Pastor Williams said to the packed sanctuary. He didn't just talk about loving his neighbor, he died proving it. In those final moments in the South Tower, David embodied Christ's teaching that there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for friends. The service was standing room only. People from David's work, old college friends, neighbors, even strangers who'd been moved by his story. The local florist, Mrs. Rossetti, had donated all the arrangements. The funeral home provided their services free of charge. Even the cemetery donated a plot in their memorial garden. But it was the high school football team that really got to me. David had volunteered as an assistant coach for the junior varsity team, helping out on weekends whenever he could. The entire team showed up in their uniforms, and the captain, a senior named Marcus, spoke on behalf of his teammates. Coach Mitchell always told us that football wasn't just about winning games, Marcus said, his young voice cracking with emotion. He said it was about character, about stepping up when your team needs you most. On September 11th, Coach Mitchell showed us what that really means. The town council held a special meeting the following month to discuss how to honor David's memory. My Lord Rodriguez, Emma Rodriguez's uncle, as it turned out, the woman David had saved, proposed creating a memorial in Millbrook Park. David Mitchell represents the best of our community, the mayor said. He was a husband, a father to be, a neighbor, and ultimately, a hero. We need to make sure his sacrifice is never forgotten. The memorial was a simple but elegant brass plaque mounted on a granite stone, positioned near the children's playground where David used to jog on Sunday mornings. The inscription read, "In memory of David Mitchell, 1967 to 2001, husband, father, hero. He gave his life saving others on September 11, 2001. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." John 15:13. The dedication ceremony was held on the first anniversary of the attacks. Hundreds of people came, including families from other towns who had lost loved ones that day. Emma, nearly a year old, sat on my lap in her little blue dress as Mayor Rodriguez spoke about courage and sacrifice. This memorial isn't just about one man, he said. It's about all of us, and the choice we make every day to look out for one another. David Mitchell made that choice in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, and we are all better for his example. After the ceremony, people lined up to shake my hand, to tell me stories about David I'd never heard. Mrs. Chen mentioned how he'd helped her elderly mother navigate her insurance claims after a fender bender. Tom Bradley from the hardware store talked about how David always asked about his son who was struggling with addiction, and had quietly slipped Tom resources for family support groups. Your husband touched so many lives, person after person told me he was special, and I believed them. How could I not? The evidence was everywhere, in their tears, their stories, their genuine love for a man who had been taken too soon. The local high school started an annual David Mitchell Memorial Scholarship for students who demonstrated community service and leadership. The first recipient was a young woman named Jennifer, who had volunteered at the soup kitchen every Saturday for 2 years. Mr. Mitchell's example taught me that heroism isn't just about one big moment, Jennifer said at the award ceremony. It's about showing up for people every day, even when nobody's watching. As Emma grew from a baby to a toddler, everywhere we went in town, people would stop to tell her about her daddy. The pharmacist would lean over the counter and say, "Your daddy was a hero, sweetheart." The librarian would pull out special books about brave people and say, "Just like your daddy." The woman at the grocery store checkout would refuse to let me pay for my groceries on September 11th each year, saying, "It's the least we can do for David's family." Emma learned to say "Daddy Hero" before she could say most other two-word combinations. She would point to his picture on our mantel and clap her little hands. When she was 3, she started asking more complex questions. "Where is Daddy?" she asked one evening as I was tucking her into bed. "Daddy is in heaven, sweetheart. He's watching over us." Why did Daddy go to heaven? I sat on the edge of her toddler bed, smoothing her dark hair that was so much like his. Daddy helped people who were scared and hurt. He was very brave, and sometimes when people are that brave, God calls them home to be angels. Is Daddy an angel now? Yes, baby Daddy is our guardian angel. She seemed satisfied with that answer, and it became part of our bedtime routine. Every night, she would blow a kiss to David's picture and whisper, "Good night, Angel Daddy." The story grew with each telling, each anniversary, each memorial service. David wasn't just a man who died in the towers, he was our town's hero, a symbol of everything good about humanity. His story gave meaning to the senseless tragedy of that day, proof that even in the darkest moments, people could choose love over fear, sacrifice over self-preservation. I treasured every word of it, every memory shared, every tear shed in his honor. This was David's legacy. And it was beautiful. That Emma was 16 when she came home from school with the assignment that would change everything. It was early March 2018, just a few weeks before her 17th birthday, and her AP history teacher had assigned a research project on personal connections to historical events. "I want to do mine on Daddy," Emma announced over dinner, her eyes bright with excitement. Mr. Patterson said I could interview people who knew him and create a comprehensive timeline of his actions on 9/11s. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. In all the years since David's death, no one had ever done serious research into the specifics of that day. The story had always been enough. David was there. David helped people. David died a hero. The details seemed less important than the meaning. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart," I said, though something in my stomach fluttered with unease. "What exactly are you planning to research?" Emma pulled out a notebook already filled with her neat handwriting. "I want to trace his exact movements that day. Like, what time did he arrive at the World Trade Center? Which floor was he on? Who exactly did he help?" Mr. Patterson says the best historical research uses primary sources and eyewitness accounts. Over the next few weeks, Emma threw herself into the project with typical teenage determination. She called the police department to request copies of the original incident reports. She reached out to 9/11's memorial organizations to see if they had records of David's heroic actions. She even tried to contact Emma Rodriguez, the woman David had allegedly saved, to get her first-hand account. But the responses she got back were frustrating and vague. "Mom, this is weird," Emma said one evening, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "Look at this." She showed me a letter from the 9/11's Memorial Foundation. It was polite but unhelpful. "While we appreciate your interest in honoring your father's memory, we do not have specific records of individual heroic actions from that day. We recommend contacting local authorities or news organizations who may have covered your father's story." "That's not that unusual, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was so much chaos that day. A lot of records were lost, but Emma was persistent. She contacted the Newark Star-Ledger, which had run the original story about David. The current editor was apologetic but explained that their archives from 2001 were incomplete due to a server crash several years ago. She tried reaching Emma Rodriguez through social media, public records, even the phone book. Nothing. It was as if the woman had vanished. "I can't find her anywhere, Mom," Emma said, frustration creeping into her voice. "Emma Rodriguez from Manhattan. I've looked everywhere. Shouldn't there be some record of her? Some mention in survivor interviews or memorial databases?" I helped her search. Both of us hunched over our laptops late into the evening. But Emma Rodriguez, the woman whose life David had supposedly saved, the woman after whom we'd named our daughter, seemed to exist only in the police report from that terrible night. The deeper Emma dug, the more questions arose. She requested David's employment records from his company in Newark, hoping to find documentation of why he'd been in Manhattan that day. "Mom, look at this," Emma said, showing me David's timesheet records that his former employer had faxed over. According to this, Dad was scheduled to be at the Newark office all day on September 11th. There's no mention of any business in New York. Maybe it was a last-minute meeting, I suggested. "You know how your father was always taking on extra projects," but Emma's history teacher, Mr. Patterson, had taught her to question inconsistencies. She made a timeline of David's known activities that morning, cross-referenced with the official timeline of the attacks. "The first plane hit at 8:46 a.m., Emma said, showing me her research. "The second plane hit at 9:03. The South Tower collapsed at 9:59. That's only an hour and 13 minutes. Mom, if Dad left for work at his usual time, around 8 o'clock, and it takes at least 45 minutes to get from Newark to Lower Manhattan, when would he have had time to help all those people?" I stared at her neat timeline, feeling that flutter of unease grow into something larger. "Honey, you have to remember that day was chaos. People's memories aren't always perfect when they're traumatized. But Mom, that's exactly why historians use multiple sources to verify facts." Emma said with the earnestness that made her so much like David. I just want to make sure I get Dad's story right. He deserves that. Emma's teacher was impressed with her thoroughness, even if her research was raising more questions than answers. Your daughter has real talent for historical investigation, Mr. Patterson told me at a parent-teacher conference. She's not satisfied with the easy answers. She wants to understand the complete truth. The complete truth. The phrase stuck with me as Emma continued her research over the following weeks. She interviewed neighbors who remembered that day, church members who'd spoken at David's memorial service, even the police officers who'd come to our door. It's funny, Emma mused one evening as we sat in the living room, surrounded by her research materials. Everyone has slightly different details about what Dad did that day. Officer Martinez remembers him helping an elderly man down the stairs, but Officer Thompson mentioned him carrying a woman with a broken ankle. Mrs. Chen said he was directing people to emergency exits, but Pastor Williams said he was looking for people trapped in offices. People remember differently, I said weakly. Trauma affects memory. I know, Mom, but usually, there's some kind of consistent thread through all the accounts. With Dad's story, it's like ... double quotes. She paused, trying to find the right words. It's like everyone remembers the hero part, but nobody remembers the same specific heroic act. Emma never finished the project the way she'd originally planned. Instead, she wrote a thoughtful essay about how collective memory shapes our understanding of historical events, using David's story as an example of how communities create meaning from tragedy. She got an A on the paper, but I could see the project had left her unsettled. At 17, Emma was starting to think like an adult, to question the stories she'd been told her whole life. Mom, she said one night as I was tucking her in, something we'd never quite stopped doing, even though she was nearly grown. Do you ever wonder about the details? About exactly what happened to Dad that day? I looked down at her, this beautiful, young woman with David's dark hair and thoughtful eyes, and I felt the ground shift slightly beneath my feet. Sometimes, I admitted, but I think the important thing is that he died trying to help people. The specifics, maybe they don't matter as much as the fact that he was brave. Emma nodded, but I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. I guess you're right. I just wish I could have talked to Emma Rodriguez, the woman he saved. I think hearing her story would have made me feel more connected to him. You know, I kissed her forehead and turned off her light, but I lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling and wondering why a 17-year-old's history project had shaken me so deeply. For the first time in 16 years, I found myself questioning not just the details of David's death, but the very foundation of the story we'd built our lives around. The letter arrived on a crisp October morning in 2023, just 2 weeks after Emma's 22nd birthday. I was in my flower shop, Bloom and Blossom, arranging a funeral spray, when Emma burst through the front door, her face glowing with excitement. Mom, you're not going to believe this. She waved a thick envelope above her head like a victory flag. I set down the white lilies I'd been working with and wiped my hands on my apron. What is it, sweetheart? Stanford, she practically shouted. Stanford Business School accepted me into their MBA program. My heart soared and sank simultaneously. Emma had been working as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup in Princeton for 2 years, saving money and gaining experience. Before applying to graduate school, Stanford had been her dream school since she was 15. Oh, honey, that's incredible. I pulled her into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo. I'm so proud of you. But as I held her, my mind was already racing through numbers. Stanford's MBA program cost nearly $150,000 for the 2-year program. Even with Emma's savings and potential financial aid, we were looking at a massive financial commitment. Emma pulled back and studied my face. You don't look as excited as I thought you'd be. I am excited, I said quickly. I'm just ... processing. This is huge, Stanford Business School. Your father would be so proud. Over the next few weeks, as Emma researched housing costs and living expenses in Palo Alto, the reality of our financial situation became increasingly clear. My flower shop, which I'd opened 5 years after David's death, was barely breaking even. The small life insurance policy David had through his job had helped us survive those early years, but it was long gone. I'd never remarried, never had another source of income besides the shop. The stack of bills on my kitchen counter seemed to grow taller each day. Emma's undergraduate loans, the mortgage on our house, My own recent medical expenses, a cancer scare the previous spring that had required surgery, and months of follow-up appointments. The insurance had covered most of it, but the deductibles and copays had drained what little savings I'd managed to accumulate. "Mom, we need to talk about money," Emma said one evening over dinner. She'd been unusually quiet lately, and I suspected she'd been doing her own calculations. "Honey, don't worry about the money. We'll figure it out." "How?" Emma's voice was gentle but direct. "Mom, I've looked at your books. The shop isn't making enough to support both of us, let alone pay for Stanford." I nearly choked on my pasta. "You looked at my books?" "I'm sorry, but I was worried. You've been so stressed lately, and when I offered to help with the bookkeeping last month, I saw the numbers." Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, you're barely covering expenses. Some months, you're actually losing money." She was right, of course. The flower business was seasonal and unpredictable. Weddings and funerals provided most of my income, but there were long stretches where I barely sold enough to cover rent and utilities. I'd been supplementing with my credit cards for months, telling myself it was temporary, that things would improve. "I can defer Stanford for a year," Emma said. "Maybe get a better paying job, save more money." "Absolutely not." The words came out more forcefully than I intended. "Your father died so you could have opportunities like this. I won't let you postpone your dreams because of money." But late at night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of our situation pressing down on me. How was I going to pay for Emma's education? How was I going to keep the shop afloat? How had I failed so completely to provide for my daughter? It was Emma's friend Rachel who first suggested I look into 9/11's survivor benefits. "Wait, your mom never applied for any of the victim compensation funds?" Rachel asked during one of their girls' nights. I overheard the conversation from the kitchen where I was cleaning up dinner dishes. "What victim compensation funds?" Emma's voice carried a note of confusion. "There have been several programs over the years for families of 9/11's victims. My aunt works for a law firm that helps people apply. She says there are education benefits, healthcare programs, all kinds of support for families like yours." I froze, a plate halfway to the dishwasher. In 22 years, it had never occurred to me to apply for any kind of government assistance. We'd had the community support, the small life insurance policy, and I'd always been fiercely independent. The idea of taking money from the government felt like profiting from David's death. "Mom," Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Did you know about these programs?" I set the plate down carefully. I knew they existed, but I never thought we were managing fine. I didn't want to take money that other families might need more. "But Mom, Dad was a victim too." "You're a victim too. These programs exist specifically for families like ours." That night, Emma spent hours on her laptop researching 9/11's victim compensation programs. The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund had been reauthorized multiple times over the years. There were education benefits, healthcare programs, even funds specifically designated for children of victims who were pursuing higher education. "Mom, look at this," Emma said, showing me her laptop screen. "There's a scholarship program that could cover my entire MBA, and there are healthcare benefits that could help with your medical bills from last year." I stared at the government website, feeling a mix of hope and guilt. "I don't know, honey. It feels wrong somehow, like we're taking advantage of your father's death." "Mom, Dad died in a terrorist attack. These programs exist because the government recognizes that families like ours shouldn't have to struggle financially on top of everything else we've been through." Over the next few days, Emma gathered all the information we'd need to apply: birth certificates, death certificates, tax returns, medical bills. The application process was extensive, requiring detailed documentation of David's death and our ongoing financial needs. "The deadline for this year's applications is in 6 weeks, Emma said, spreading the paperwork across our kitchen table. "If we're going to do this, we need to start now." I picked up the main application form, my hands trembling slightly. After 22 years of independence, of pride, of managing on our own, I was finally ready to admit that we needed help. "Okay," I said quietly, "let's do it. Your father would want you to have every opportunity possible." Emma smiled and squeezed my hand. "This is the right thing to do, Mom. Dad was a hero. His family deserves support." As I signed my name on the first page of the application, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Finally, we were going to get the help we needed. Finally, Emma would be able to pursue her dreams without the crushing weight of financial stress. I had no idea that this simple act, applying for benefits that should have been ours all along, would destroy everything I thought I knew about the man I'd loved and the life we'd built in his memory. That the engagement happened on Christmas Eve, 2023, in the most romantic way possible. Emma's boyfriend Jake had been planning it for months, and somehow he'd managed to keep it a secret from my daughter, who could usually sniff out surprises from a mile away. Jake had asked for my blessing 3 weeks earlier, showing up at the flower shop on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, with nervous energy radiating from every pore of his 24-year-old body. "Mrs. Mitchell, I know this might seem sudden," he'd said, fidgeting with the baseball cap in his hands, "but I love Emma more than anything in the world, and I want to spend my life making her happy." Jake Chen was everything I could have hoped for in a son-in-law. He was kind, ambitious, and absolutely devoted to Emma. They'd met at Princeton during their senior year, bonded over late-night study sessions and a shared love of terrible romantic comedies. He was finishing his medical residency at University Hospital, planning to specialize in pediatric cardiology, a choice that had everything to do with his own childhood heart condition, and his desire to help other kids facing the same challenges. "She talks about her father all the time," Jake had continued, his voice growing more confident, "about how brave he was, how he always put others first. I know I can never replace him, but I promise I'll love Emma the way he would have wanted her to be loved." I'd given my blessing, of course, along with David's grandmother's engagement ring, a beautiful Art Deco diamond that had been sitting in my jewelry box for 23 years, waiting for this moment. The proposal itself was perfect. Jake had convinced Emma they were just going to his parents' house for their annual Christmas Eve dinner. But when they arrived, the backyard was strung with thousands of twinkling lights. Both families were there, hidden and waiting. And when Jake dropped to one knee in the center of it all, Emma's gasp of joy could probably be heard 3 blocks away. "Sarah," she said. "Yes." Jake called me immediately after, his voice cracking with emotion, while Emma sobbed happy tears in the background. I drove straight to the Chen family home, still wearing my pajamas under my winter coat, and found Emma surrounded by both families, her face glowing as she stared at the ring on her finger. "Mom, look." She held out her hand, and David's grandmother's ring caught the Christmas lights like it was made of stars. "It's Grandma Rose's ring." Jake said, "You gave it to him." "It was your father's grandmother's," I said, pulling her into a hug. "She always said it would go to David's wife someday, and then to his daughter. It looks perfect on you." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of engagement parties, venue shopping, and wedding magazines. Emma approached wedding planning with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to everything else, creating spreadsheets and timelines and detailed budgets. "I want something elegant but not too fancy," she told me as we sat in the first bridal salon, flipping through books of dress designs. Something Dad would have been proud to walk me down the aisle in. The mention of David walking her down the aisle hit me like a physical blow. In all the excitement of the engagement, I hadn't fully processed that David wouldn't be there for the wedding. Emma's Uncle Mark, my brother, had already offered to walk her down the aisle, but it wasn't the same. It would never be the same. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma was looking at me with concern, and I realized I'd been staring at a picture of a bride and her father for several minutes without speaking. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about your dad. He would have loved Jake." "I know," Emma said, softly. "Sometimes I imagine what he would say about the wedding. I think he'd probably tell me not to spend too much money on flowers since you own a flower shop." She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. As we visited venue after venue, the costs began to add up in my mind. The country club Emma loved charged $200 per person for dinner. The band she wanted cost $8,000. Even the simplest floral arrangements would run several $1,000s. Despite my shop discount, "Emma, honey, let's talk about budget," I said one evening, as we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by contracts and price lists. "I know it's expensive, Mom. Jake and I can pay for a lot of it ourselves. His parents want to contribute to. It's not about who pays for what," I said carefully. "It's about making sure we're being realistic about what we can afford." Emma bit her lip, looking suddenly young and uncertain. "I don't want to have some tiny, cheap wedding, Mom. This is the only wedding I'm ever going to have. I want it to be beautiful." "Of course you do, and it will be beautiful. I just want to make sure we plan something that won't put anyone in debt." But even as I said it, I was mentally calculating numbers. If the 9/11's victim compensation came through, we could afford to give Emma the wedding she wanted. We could afford Stanford. We could afford everything. Actually, I said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. Let's not worry about the budget right now. Let's plan the wedding you want, and we'll figure out how to pay for it. Emma's face lit up. Really? Are you sure? I'm sure. Your father would want you to have a perfect wedding day. Money is just money. Memories last forever. Over the next few weeks, Emma threw herself into wedding planning with renewed enthusiasm. She booked the country club for the following October, hired the band, ordered invitations with elegant script that read Mr. and Mrs. Sarah Mitchell request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Emma Rose to Jake Michael Chen. I wanted Dad's name on the invitations somehow, Emma explained. Even though he's not here to host the wedding with you, he's still my father. I stared at the proof of the invitation, seeing David's name printed there in gold script, and felt a complex mix of emotions, pride, sadness, and underneath it all, a growing anxiety about how we were going to pay for everything we were promising. The wedding was shaping up to be exactly what Emma had dreamed of: elegant, romantic, and expensive. Very expensive. Between the venue, the flowers, the dress, the band, and all the other details, we were looking at nearly $50,000. I found the perfect dress, Emma announced one afternoon, showing me pictures on her phone. It's at this boutique in Manhattan. It's a little more than we originally budgeted. But Mom, it's perfect. It looks like something a princess would wear. The dress cost $4,000 for one day. I thought about the stack of bills on my counter, about the loan payments and credit card balances that were keeping me awake at night. Then I looked at Emma's radiant face and made another decision I hoped I wouldn't regret. Let's go try it on this weekend, I said. Really, even though it's over budget. Emma, this is your wedding dress. You're only going to wear a wedding dress once in your life. It should be perfect. As Emma hugged me, bouncing slightly with excitement, I silently prayed that the compensation fund application would come through soon, because I was making promises with money I didn't have, banking everything on benefits that might or might not materialize. But looking at my daughter's joy, seeing the way she lit up when she talked about her future with Jake, I knew I'd figure it out somehow. David would have wanted Emma to have everything her heart desired. I wasn't going to let financial stress overshadow what should be the happiest time of her life, even if it meant risking everything we had. The New York City Office of Emergency Management was housed in a stark government building in Lower Manhattan, just a few miles from where the World Trade Center once stood. As I walked through the metal detectors and past the security guards, I felt the weight of 23 years pressing down on my shoulders. Emma had offered to come with me, but I'd insisted on handling the application process myself. This felt like something I needed to do alone, a final act of advocacy for David and protection for our family's future. The waiting room was filled with other families like mine, people who looked tired, stressed, and hopeful all at once. An elderly woman clutched a folder of documents while her adult son filled out forms beside her. A man about my age stared blankly at a wall covered with informational posters about victim services and mental health resources. Sarah Mitchell, a young woman in a navy blazer, appeared at the counter. I'm Jennifer Walsh, your caseworker. Thank you for coming in today. Jennifer led me to a small office with fluorescent lighting and two uncomfortable chairs facing each other across a metal desk. The walls were covered with certificates and government regulations, giving the space an official but impersonal feeling. I've reviewed your preliminary application, Jennifer said, opening a thick folder. I need to ask you some specific questions about your husband's death to complete your file. I nodded, pulling out my own folder of documents. I'd brought everything I could think of: David's death certificate, our marriage license, Emma's birth certificate, tax returns from 2001, even some of the newspaper clippings from that first week. Let's start with the basics, Jennifer said, her pen poised over a form. Your husband's full name was David Michael Mitchell, correct? Born March 15, 1967. Yes, that's correct. And he died in the World Trade Center attack on September 11, 2001. Yes, the word came out as barely a whisper. I need some specifics about his presence at the World Trade Center that day. What was his reason for being there? I paused, realizing that in 23 years, I'd never actually been asked this question directly. He was there on business. Some kind of financial consultation. Jennifer looked up from her form. Do you know which company he was meeting with? Which floor he was on? I felt heat creeping up my neck. I don't have those specific details. It all happened so fast, and in the chaos afterward, those kinds of specifics seemed less important than just processing the grief. Of course, I understand, Jennifer said kindly. Let me check what we have in our database. She turned to her computer and began typing. I watched her face as she searched, noting the slight frown that creased her forehead. After a few minutes, Mrs. Mitchell, I'm not seeing your husband's name in our primary database of confirmed World Trade Center victims. Let me try a few different search parameters. My heart began beating faster. What do you mean? Not in the database. Sometimes names are entered differently, or there are spelling variations. Let me try searching by social security number. She typed for several more minutes while I sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder with each passing second. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm having trouble locating your husband in our records. Do you happen to know what company he worked for? Hartwell and Associates, I said immediately. It's an accounting firm in Newark. But you said he was in Manhattan on business that day. Yes, that's what the police told me. He was meeting with a client. Jennifer made a note on her form. Let me ask you this. Do you have any documentation of your husband's employment? Pay stubs, tax forms, anything that might help us verify his work history? I pulled out David's final pay stub from Hartwell and Associates, dated September 7, 2001. Jennifer examined it carefully. This shows his regular workplace was in Newark, New Jersey. Do you have any documentation of the meeting that brought him to Manhattan that day? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I realized that in 23 years, I'd never seen a single piece of paper connecting David to any business in Manhattan. No emails, no appointment confirmations, no client contracts. I don't have anything like that, I admitted. After he died, I didn't really go through his business files. It was too painful. That's completely understandable, Jennifer said. Let me try a different approach. Do you have the name of the police officer who notified you of your husband's death? Officer Martinez and Officer Thompson from the Millbrook Police Department. Jennifer made more notes. And they provided you with details about how your husband died. Yes, they said he was helping people evacuate from the South Tower, that he was seen guiding people to the stairwells, and that he went back to look for more people when the building collapsed. Do you have a copy of the police report from that notification? I shook my head. I never thought to ask for one. They just told me what happened, and I believed them. Jennifer's expression was growing more concerned. Mrs. Mitchell, I want to be very careful here. Our records showed that your husband's body was never recovered from the World Trade Center site. That's right, a lot of people were never found. The destruction was so complete, yes, but typically, even when BOFDAs aren't recovered, we have documentation of the person's presence at the site. Witness statements, security footage, employment records, something that places them there that day. The room suddenly felt very small and very hot. Are you saying there's a problem with my application? I'm saying we need more documentation before we can process your claim. Without proof that your husband was actually at the World Trade Center on September 11th, we can't approve benefits. I stared at her, feeling like the floor was shifting beneath my chair. But everyone knows he was there. Our whole town knows. There were newspaper articles. Memorial services. He's on the town memorial. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand this is difficult, but we need official documentation, not just community testimony. A lot of stories got confused in the aftermath of the attacks. People wanted to honor the dead, and sometimes facts got interpreted generously. What are you suggesting? Jennifer chose her words carefully. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply saying that before we can approve your application, we need concrete evidence that your husband was present at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. I left the office that day with a list of additional documents I needed to provide: employment records showing David's reason for being in Manhattan, witness statements from people who saw him at the World Trade Center, any correspondence related to business meetings that day. As I walked back to my car, my hands shaking as I tried to fit the key in the lock, one thought kept repeating in my mind. After 23 years of believing my husband died a hero, I couldn't prove he'd been there at all. And for the first time since that terrible September morning, I found myself wondering if the story I'd built my entire life around was actually true. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February, exactly 3 weeks after my meeting with Jennifer Walsh. I was arranging flowers for the Hendersons' 50th anniversary party when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. The number was unfamiliar, and I was focused on getting the perfect balance of white roses and baby's breath, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Office of Emergency Management. Do you have a few minutes to talk? My stomach dropped. I'd been dreading this call for weeks, ever since I'd failed to produce any of the additional documentation they'd requested, despite hours of searching through David's old files, calling his former colleagues, even driving to his old office building in Newark. I'd come up empty. Yes, I can talk, I said, setting down the roses and walking to the back room of my shop for privacy. Mrs. Mitchell, I've completed my review of your application and the additional research you requested. I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share with you. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of difficult news? Based on our investigation, we have no record of your husband, David Mitchell, being present at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean, no record? We've checked every database. We have access to security footage, employee records, visitor logs, witness statements, victim identification lists. Your husband's name doesn't appear in any of them. I sank into the folding chair I kept in the storage room, feeling dizzy. But that's impossible. The police told me he was there. The whole community knows he died there. Mrs. Mitchell, I spoke with the Millbrook Police Department about their original report. Officer Martinez, who notified you of your husband's death, is now retired, but he agreed to speak with me. What did he say? Jennifer paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. He said that on the night of September 11th, they received a call about a body found in a residential area of Millbrook. The body was identified as your husband. A residential area. My voice sounded strange and far away. What residential area? Maple Street, about 6 blocks from your home. Mrs. Mitchell, according to the original police report, the real police report, not the story you were told, your husband died in a car accident that morning. The room began to spin. A car accident. He apparently lost control of his vehicle and hit a tree. The coroner estimated time of death at approximately 8:30 a.m. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband never made it to Manhattan that day. He never made it out of your own neighborhood. I couldn't breathe. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. That's not what they told me. They said he was a hero. They said he saved people. Mrs. Mitchell, I am so very sorry. It appears that someone, possibly the police officers who notified you, possibly other community members, created a different story to spare you additional pain. You were pregnant and had just lost your husband. Perhaps they thought the truth would be too much to bear. The truth, I whispered. The truth is that your husband died in a single car accident on September 11, 2001, approximately 6 hours before the World Trade Center attacks. He was never in Manhattan. He never saved anyone. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, on a morning when the whole world seemed to be falling apart. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye and sat in the storage room surrounded by flowers, breathing in their sweet scent while my entire world crumbled around me. 20-3 years. 23 years of believing David died a hero. 23 years of raising Emma on stories of her father's courage and sacrifice. 23 years of living in a town that revered David's memory, that had built memorials to his bravery, that had shaped their understanding of that terrible day around his supposed heroism. And it was all a lie. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I heard the shop bell ring as someone came in. I forced myself to stand up, to smooth my hair, to paste a smile on my face, and walk back out to help whatever customer needed flowers for whatever real event was happening in their real life. But inside, I was screaming. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a bottle of wine and David's death certificate, the real one, the one I'd never actually read carefully. There it was, in black and white: cause of death, motor vehicle accident, location, Maple Street, Millbrook, NJ, time of death, 8:30 a.m. How had I never noticed? How had I lived with this document for 23 years and never actually read the details? Because I'd been told a different story. Because the police officers who came to my door had painted a picture so vivid, so noble, so meaningful, that I'd never questioned it. Because a pregnant widow needed to believe her husband died for something greater than a random accident on a Tuesday morning. I poured another glass of wine and started making a list of everyone who must have known the truth. Officer Martinez and Officer Thompson, obviously. But who else? The coroner who wrote the death certificate, the tow truck driver who removed David's car, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, the newspaper reporter who wrote the first story about David's heroism. How many people had conspired to lie to me? How many people in my own community had looked me in the eye for 23 years and let me believe a fiction? And Emma. Oh God, Emma. How was I going to tell Emma that everything she'd ever believed about her father was a lie? That the bedtime stories, the school reports, the pride she carried as the daughter of a 9/11's hero, none of it was real. I thought about calling her right then, but I couldn't form the words. How do you tell your 23-year-old daughter that her entire identity is built on a foundation of lies? Instead, I sat in my kitchen until dawn, drinking wine and staring at David's coffee mug on the counter, the one I'd never moved, the one that had become a shrine to his memory. World's greatest dad, it proclaimed. But what kind of father leaves his pregnant wife a legacy of lies? By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision. I was going to find out the truth, all of it. Not just how David really died, but why an entire community had chosen to lie to me about it. I was going to uncover every detail of the deception that had shaped my life for more than 2 decades, and then I was going to decide what to do with the truth. But first, I had to figure out how to tell Emma that her hero father was just a man who died in a car accident on the worst day in American history, and that everyone we'd ever trusted had been lying to us both. I called in sick to the flower shop the next morning for the first time in 5 years. Instead of arranging bouquets and helping customers choose sympathy flowers, I drove to the Millbrook Police Department with a single mission: to get a copy of the real police report from September 11, 2001. The desk sergeant was a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25. She would have been a toddler when David died. I need a copy of a police report from 2001, I told her, sliding a formal request form across the counter. That's pretty old, she said, typing into her computer. David Mitchell. Oh, here it is. Motor vehicle accident, Maple Street. She paused, reading something on her screen. Ma'am, are you family? I'm his widow. Her expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss. Let me print this for you. When she handed me the report, my hands shook as I read the clinical details of David's final moments. Vehicle appeared to have lost control on wet pavement, striking oak tree at approximately 45 miles per hour. Myra was alone in vehicle. No evidence of mechanical failure or external factors. Preliminary investigation suggests driver may have been distracted or fell asleep at wheel. Distracted or fell asleep. My mind raced through the possibilities. David had been working long hours that fall, staying late at the office, coming home tired and stressed. Had he fallen asleep driving to work? Had he been on his phone? The report mentioned his cell phone was found at the scene, but didn't specify if he'd been using it. When the accident occurred, I drove to Maple Street next, something I'd never done in 23 years of living in the same town. It was a quiet residential street lined with mature oak trees. I found the tree easily. There was still a subtle scar in the bark, and the township had planted a small garden around its base years ago. Standing there, looking at the tree that had actually killed my husband, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with rage. Relief that I finally knew the truth, rage that I'd been denied it for so long. From Maple Street, I drove to Hartwell and Associates, David's former accounting firm. The building was the same modest 2-story office complex it had been in 2001, though the landscaping had changed and there was a new sign out front. The receptionist was polite but confused when I explained who I was. I'm sorry, but Mr. Hartwell retired years ago, and most of our records from that time period are in storage. Can I ask what this is regarding? I'm trying to understand my husband's work schedule from September 11, 2001. I need to know if he had any meetings scheduled in Manhattan that day. She disappeared into the back office and returned with an older woman who introduced herself as Patricia Wells, the office manager. Patricia had been with the firm for 30 years and remembered David well. David was a good employee, Patricia said, settling into a chair across from me in a small conference room. Reliable, thorough, well-liked by clients. I was so sorry to hear about his death. Patricia, I need to ask you something very important. Did David have any business in Manhattan on September 11th? Any client meetings or consultations? Patricia frowned, thinking, no, I don't believe so. September 11th was a Tuesday, and David typically handled local clients on Tuesdays. His Manhattan clients were usually scheduled for Thursdays or Fridays, So, there was no business reason for him to be in New York that day. Not that I'm aware of. In fact, I remember being surprised when I heard he'd died in the World Trade Center attacks, because I couldn't figure out why he would have been there. My heart sank. You heard, he died in the World Trade Center. Well, yes, that's what everyone said. The newspapers, the memorial service. I always assumed there must have been some last-minute meeting I didn't know about. I stared at her, this kind woman who had worked with my husband for years, who had believed the same lie that had fooled an entire community. Patricia, David, didn't die in the World Trade Center. He died in a car accident in Millbrook that morning. Her face went pale. What? But everyone said, ... double quotes, everyone was wrong, or everyone was lying. I'm trying to figure out which. Patricia helped me access David's employment records from 2001. His timesheet for September 11th showed he was scheduled to be in the office all day, with appointments blocked for 3 local clients. There was no mention of any Manhattan meetings, no travel authorization, no expense reports for New York travel. Mrs. Mitchell, Patricia said quietly as I reviewed the documents, David was having some personal difficulties around that time. He seemed stressed, distracted. He'd been making some uncharacteristic mistakes at work. What kind of personal difficulties? I probably shouldn't say anything, but, well, it's been 23 years, and you deserve to know the truth. David had been coming in late and leaving early. He'd taken several unexplained personal days. Mr. Hartwell had spoken to him about it just the week before he died. Did he say what was going on? Patricia hesitated. He said he was dealing with some family issues, but we all assumed he meant the pregnancy, the stress of becoming a new father. Now, I'm wondering if there was something else. I left Hartwell and Associates with a box of David's personal files and employment records, feeling like I was excavating an archaeological site. Each document I uncovered revealed another piece of a puzzle I'd never known existed. That evening, I spread everything out on my dining room table. The police report, the employment records, old calendars, credit card statements I'd never carefully examined. For the first time in 23 years, I was looking at David's life through the lens of suspicion rather than grief. And that's when I found the first real clue. Tucked between pages in David's day planner from 2001 was a receipt from a Manhattan restaurant dated September 10th, the day before he died. It was for dinner for 2 at an expensive Italian place in Midtown. The total was $127, far more than David and I would have spent on a dinner out, especially when I was 7 months pregnant and could barely stay awake past 8 p.m. I stared at that receipt until the numbers blurred. David had been in Manhattan the night before he died, having dinner with someone who wasn't me, someone who ordered wine and appetizers and dessert, someone he'd never mentioned. For 23 years, I'd believed my husband died a hero, saving strangers in a moment of national tragedy, but the truth was becoming clear. David had been keeping secrets. He'd been in Manhattan for reasons he hadn't shared with me, meeting with people I didn't know about, and on the morning of September 11th, driving to God knows where for God knows what reason, he'd crashed his car into a tree and died with those secrets. I poured myself another glass of wine and kept digging through the documents, knowing that whatever truth I uncovered was going to hurt. But I was past the point of wanting comfortable lies. I needed to know who my husband really was, and what he'd been doing in the last days of his life. Because if David had been living a double life, if he'd been lying to me about where he was and who he was with, then the heroic story wasn't the only fiction I'd been living with. The real David Mitchell, the one who died that Tuesday morning in September, was a stranger to me, and I was finally ready to meet him. The attic was the last place I wanted to look. But after 3 days of searching through every file cabinet and drawer in our house, it was the only place left. I'd been avoiding it for 23 years, telling myself I was preserving David's memory by leaving his things untouched. But now I realized I'd been preserving something else, my own ignorance. The ladder creaked as I climbed up, flashlight in hand. The attic smelled of dust and old wood, with cardboard boxes stacked in neat rows along the slanted walls. Most of them were labeled in David's careful handwriting: Christmas decorations, college photos, tax records, 1995 to 2000. But there was one box, pushed far back into the corner behind the water heater, that had no label at all. Inside, I found a life I'd never known existed. The first thing I pulled out was a cell phone, not David's regular phone, which I'd inherited and used until it finally broke. but a different one entirely, a small flip phone that looked barely used. When I pressed the power button, nothing happened. The battery had died years ago. Beneath the phone was a stack of credit card statements for a card I'd never seen before, a MasterCard in David's name, with a billing address I didn't recognize, a P.O. box in Princeton. The statements showed charges I couldn't explain, expensive restaurants in Manhattan, hotel rooms, jewelry stores, department stores I'd never shopped at. And then I found the lease agreement, that it was for a studio apartment on East 73rd Street in Manhattan, signed by David Mitchell and dated March 2001. The monthly rent was $2,800, more than our mortgage payment in Millbrook. According to the lease, David had been paying for this apartment for 6 months before he died. My hands shook as I continued digging through the box. There were spare keys, what looked like duplicate credit cards, and a small address book filled with names and numbers I didn't recognize. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a silk scarf I'd never seen before, was a collection of photographs. They were pictures of David with a woman, not just any woman, a beautiful, dark-haired woman who looked to be in her early 30s. In photo after photo, they were laughing together, holding hands, looking at each other with the kind of intimacy that made my stomach turn. There were pictures of them at restaurants, walking through Central Park, sitting on a couch in what must have been the apartment David had been renting. One photo showed the woman wearing the same silk scarf that had been wrapped around the pictures. In another, David was kissing her forehead while she smiled up at him with obvious adoration. And in the last photo, the one that made me drop the entire stack, the woman was showing off a diamond bracelet on her wrist, the same bracelet I now realized David had charged to that secret credit card in August 2001. I sat in the dusty attic surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal, trying to reconcile the man I'd loved and mourned for 23 years with the stranger who had been living a double life behind my back. The secret phone, the Manhattan apartment, the other woman, the expensive gifts. It was all there, documented in receipts and photographs and lease agreements. David hadn't been working late at the office. He'd been in Manhattan with his mistress. I found the charger for the secret phone in the box and plugged it in downstairs, waiting anxiously as it powered up. When it finally came to life, I scrolled through the call history and text messages, each one another knife to the heart. The phone was full of text exchanges between David and someone named Michelle. Sweet, intimate messages that read like love letters. Missing you already. Can't wait for Friday. Had the most amazing dream about you last night. You make me feel alive in ways I never knew possible. And then, in the final days of David's life, the messages took on a different tone. September 9. We need to talk about Sarah and the baby. I can't keep doing this. September 10th. I've made my decision. I want to be with you. I'll tell her after the baby is born. September 11th, 7:42 a.m. On my way to you now. Something's happened in the city, but I'm coming anyway. I love you. The timestamp on that last message was 7:42 a.m., 48 minutes before David died in a car accident on Maple Street, driving toward Manhattan, driving toward Michelle. I put the phone down and wept, not for David's heroic sacrifice, but for the man who had been planning to leave his pregnant wife for another woman, who had died not saving strangers, but abandoning his family. But there was more to discover. I found Michelle's full name in David's secret address book, Michelle Torres, along with an address that matched the restaurant receipt from September 10th. She lived in a luxury high-rise on the Upper East Side, just a few blocks from the apartment David had been renting. I also found bank statements for an account I'd never known about. David had been depositing money into this account for months, apparently saving up for his new life with Michelle. The final balance, as of September 10, 2001, was $47,000. $47,000. Money that should have been helping us prepare for Emma's birth, instead being squirreled away for David's escape plan. The cruelest discovery was a handwritten letter, clearly a draft of something David had planned to give me. It was dated September 15, 2001, 4 days after he actually died, which must have been when he'd planned to have the conversation that would destroy our marriage. Sarah, the letter began, by the time you read this, you'll know that I've made a terrible mistake. Not in loving you or wanting our child, but in not being honest about my feelings. I've met someone else, and I can't continue living a lie. You deserve better than a husband who isn't completely devoted to you and our family. I hope someday you can forgive me. I read the letter 3 times before I fully understood what it meant. David hadn't been planning to leave after Emma was born. He'd been planning to wait just long enough to make sure I could handle the pregnancy and delivery alone, and then abandon us both. He'd been driving to Michelle that Tuesday morning, probably to finalize their plans, or maybe to bring her somewhere safe from the chaos that was unfolding in the city. Maybe they'd planned to use the crisis as cover for his disappearance from our lives. Instead, he died on Maple Street, taking his secrets with him and leaving me to raise Emma alone while believing he was a hero. As I sat surrounded by the evidence of David's betrayal, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Devastation, obviously. Rage at being lied to for so long. But also, weirdly, relief. For 23 years, I'd felt like I could never measure up to David's final act of heroism. I'd felt like a failure as a wife, because surely, if I'd been a better partner, David wouldn't have needed to be such a hero to strangers. Now I knew the truth. David hadn't been a hero at all. He'd been a cheating husband who'd died while running away from his responsibilities, and somehow, that felt less lonely than thinking I'd been married to a saint. Officer Martinez lived in a small ranch house on the outskirts of Millbrook, with a well-maintained garden and American flag hanging from the front porch. He answered the door in a worn NYPD t-shirt and jeans, his once dark hair now completely gray, his face creased with the kind of lines that come from decades of delivering bad news to families. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, recognition dawning in his eyes. I heard you might be coming by." "You heard from who?" I asked, clutching the folder of documents I'd brought with me. "Jennifer Walsh from the emergency management office called. She said you'd found out about the real circumstances of your husband's death." I stared at him, this man who had stood in my living room 23 years ago and told me my husband was a hero. "Can I come in? I think we need to talk." His living room was comfortable and lived in, with family photos covering every surface and a large television tuned to a baseball game. He muted the sound and gestured for me to sit on his couch. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that everything we did because we thought it was the right thing. You lied to me for 23 years, I said quietly. "You told me my husband died saving people, when he actually died in a car accident 6 blocks from my house." Martinez sat heavily in his recliner, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "You were 7 months pregnant. It was the worst day in American history. We'd just spent hours pulling bodies out of wreckage and watching the towers fall. And then we got this call about a car accident. So you decided to rewrite the story. Sarah, can I call you Sarah? When we found David's car, we also found his cell phone. The last text message was to someone named Michelle, saying he was on his way to her. It was pretty clear what was happening. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. You read his private messages. It was evidence at an accident scene. We had to process everything." Martinez leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "Sarah, your husband was leaving you. On September 11th, he was driving to Manhattan to be with another woman while his pregnant wife sat at home watching the towers fall." The words hit me like physical blows, even though I already knew the truth. Hearing it from someone else made it real in a way that finding the evidence myself hadn't. "So you decided I couldn't handle the truth." "We decided that a pregnant widow didn't need to know that her husband died while abandoning her family. And when the whole country was looking for heroes, when everyone needed to believe in something good," Martinez spread his hands helplessly. "It seemed kinder to let people think David had died trying to save others." "Kinder to who? To me, or to yourselves?" Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe to all of us. Sarah, I've been a cop for 42 years. I've delivered a lot of death notifications. And I can tell you that most of the time, families need something to hold on to. They need their loved one's death to mean something. But it wasn't your decision to make." "You're right," he said simply. "It wasn't. But in that moment, with you sitting there pregnant and devastated, with the whole world falling apart around us, it felt like the right thing to do." I pulled out the original police report and set it on his coffee table. How many people knew? How many people in this town have been lying to me for 23 years? Martinez studied the report like he was seeing it for the first time in decades. "Not many, at first. Me and Thompson, obviously. The coroner. The tow truck driver who cleared the scene. But Sarah, once the story got out, once the newspapers picked it up and the community started rallying around you, It took on a life of its own. What do you mean? I mean that after a while, I think a lot of people genuinely believed David had died in the towers. The story got told and retold so many times, with so much emotion behind it, that it became the truth for most folks. They weren't lying to you because they knew better. They were repeating what they believed to be true. I thought about all the people who had comforted me over the years, who had told Emma stories about her heroic father, who had contributed to memorial funds and attended anniversary services. How many of them had been protecting a lie, and how many had been victims of it themselves? What about the newspaper reporter, the one who wrote the first story about David being a 9/11's hero? Martinez winced. Tommy Brennan from the he's retired now, lives in Florida. Tommy was, well, he was looking for a local angle on the attacks. When he heard that a Millbrook man had died in the towers, he didn't dig too deep into the details, because you didn't give him the real details, because we confirmed that a Millbrook man had died on September 11th, and we let him draw his own conclusions about how and where. I stared at this man who had shaped my entire adult life with a single decision made in a moment of crisis. Officer Martinez, do you have any idea what you've done to me, to my daughter, Sarah? You've made us live a lie for 20 years. Emma thinks her father was a hero. She's built her entire identity around being the daughter of a 9/11's hero. And now I have to tell her that not only was her father not a hero, but he was planning to abandon us. Tears were running down my cheeks now, and Martinez looked stricken. Mrs. Mitchell, I am so very sorry. If I could go back and handle it differently, but you can't, I said, standing up. You can't undo 23 years of lies. You can't give me back the marriage I thought I had, or give Emma back the father she thought she had. I gathered up my papers and headed for the door, then turned back. One more question. The woman David was involved with, Michelle Torres, did she survive the attacks? Martinez nodded slowly. As far as I know, yes, she was never in any danger. She lived on the Upper East Side, nowhere near the World Trade Center. So she's been alive all these years, knowing the truth about David's death. And she never tried to contact me. Would you have wanted her to? I considered this. 23 years ago, pregnant and grieving, would I have wanted David's mistress to show up at my door to tell me my husband had been planning to leave me? Would I have wanted to know that he died while driving to be with her? I don't know, I admitted, but I would have wanted the choice. I left Martinez's house feeling drained but oddly empowered. For the first time in 23 years, I understood exactly what had happened to my husband and why. The truth was ugly and painful, but it was mine. Now I had to decide what to do with it. The drive home took me past the memorial in Millbrook Park, where David's brass plaque still proclaimed him a hero. I pulled over and sat in my car, staring at the monument that had been built on a foundation of lies. How many other families had contributed money to that memorial, believing they were honoring a genuine hero? How many children had been inspired by David's false story of courage and sacrifice? And what would happen to our small community when the truth came out, as it inevitably would, now that I knew it? I thought about Emma, about her wedding planning, and her dreams for the future. I thought about Jake, who had asked for my blessing to marry the daughter of a 9/11's hero. I thought about all the ways this truth would ripple outward, destroying not just my understanding of the past, but Emma's sense of herself and our family's place in the community. But as I sat there looking at that monument, I realized something important. I was tired of living a lie, even a beautiful one. I was tired of feeling like I could never measure up to the memory of St. David. I was tired of carrying the weight of someone else's fiction. It was time for the truth to come out. No matter how much it hurt, it was time for Emma to know who her father really was. I called Emma on Thursday evening and asked her to come home for the weekend. I tried to keep my voice normal, casual, but she knew me too well. Mom, you sound weird. Is everything okay? Is it your health again? I'm fine, sweetheart. I just need to talk to you about something important. Can you drive up Saturday morning? Of course. Should I bring Jake? I thought about this. Jake would find out eventually, but this conversation needed to be just between Emma and me first. Just you this time. We'll have dinner with Jake another weekend. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I'd spent the previous 2 days rehearsing what I was going to say, how I was going to explain 23 years of lies, without destroying my daughter's ability to trust anyone ever again. I'd set up all the evidence on the dining room table, the police reports, the employment records, the secret phone, the photographs, the love letters. It looked like a detective's murder board, which in a way, it was. The murder of everything Emma had believed about her father. Emma arrived at 10 a.m., with coffee and bagels from our favorite deli, her usual weekend offering. She was chattering about wedding plans as she unpacked the food, excited about a band she and Jake had heard the night before. "Mom, you should have seen them. They did this amazing acoustic version of At Last that would be perfect for our first dance. And the lead singer said they can learn any song we want for the father-daughter dance," which got me thinking about what song Dad would have chosen. She trailed off when she saw my face. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Emma, honey, sit down, please." She perched on the edge of the kitchen chair, suddenly alert and wary. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" I'd planned to ease into it gently, to provide context and cushion the blow. But looking at my beautiful daughter, seeing her trust and openness, I realized there was no gentle way to destroy someone's entire understanding of their life. "Emma, the benefits application was denied." "Okay," she said slowly. "That's disappointing, but we'll figure out another way to pay for Stanford. You don't look this upset about money." "It wasn't denied because of money issues. It was denied because ... I took a deep breath. "Because your father wasn't at the World Trade Center on September 11th. Emma stared at me blankly. "What do you mean he wasn't there?" "I mean he was never in Manhattan that day. He never saved anyone. He died in a car accident in Millbrook, about 6 blocks from our house." The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Emma blinked several times, as if trying to process language she didn't understand. "That's impossible," she said finally. "Everyone knows Dad died in the towers. There are newspaper articles. The memorial people saw him there. No one saw him there. The whole story was made up. Made up by who? The police. The community. People who thought they were protecting me from a harder truth." Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "Mom, this doesn't make sense. Why would anyone make up a story like that?" I gestured toward the dining room, where all the evidence waited, because the real story was worse. Much worse. For the next hour, I walked Emma through every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence I'd uncovered. I watched my daughter's face transform from confusion to disbelief to devastation as the truth sank in. She held the secret cell phone in her hands, scrolling through the text messages between David and Michelle, reading the love letters that proved her father had been planning to leave us. "He was going to abandon us," Emma whispered, staring at David's draft letter. "He was going to wait until I was born and then just leave. It looks that way." Emma picked up one of the photographs showing David and Michelle together, studying her father's face. "He looks so happy," she said, and her voice broke on the last word. "Emma, no, Mom, he does. Look at this picture. He looks happier than I've ever seen him look in any photo with us." She was right. In the photos with Michelle, David looked relaxed, carefree, alive in a way I'd forgotten he could be. It was another knife to the heart, realizing that even my memories of our marriage might have been tainted by his deception. Emma sank into the dining room chair, still holding the photograph. "So, everything I've ever believed about my father is a lie." "Not everything. He did love you, Em. Even if he was planning to leave, he loved you." "How can you say that?" Emma's voice was sharp now, angry. "How can you love someone and plan to abandon them before they're even born?" I didn't have an answer for that. I'd been asking myself the same question for days. Emma pulled out her childhood journal, the one she'd kept from ages 7 to 14, and flipped through pages filled with entries about her hero daddy. "Listen to this," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Dear Diary, today at school we talked about heroes and I told everyone about my dad, who saved people in the towers. Mrs. Peterson said I should be very proud. I am proud. I hope I can be brave like Dad someday." She slammed the journal shut. "I wrote hundreds of entries like that, Mom, hundreds. I did that stupid research project in high school because I wanted to understand his heroism better. I've spent my entire life trying to live up to a man who didn't even exist." "Emma, you are living up to something. You're living up to the best parts of yourself, and those don't have anything to do with your father's actions, don't they?" Emma stood up again, agitated. "My whole personality, my whole sense of right and wrong, my drive to help people, I thought all of that came from him. I thought I inherited his courage and compassion." "You did inherit courage and compassion. Just not from David." Emma looked at me with tears streaming down her face. Then from who? If my father was a coward and a cheater, and you just let everyone lie to me for 23 years. The accusation hung in the air between us. Emma was right to be angry with me too. I had been a victim of the deception, but I'd also been a perpetrator of it. Repeating the heroic story to Emma year after year, building her identity on a foundation I'd never bothered to verify. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I'm so sorry, Em. I should have questioned the story. I should have investigated when you did your research project and found inconsistencies. I should have protected you from this by finding out the truth years ago." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What am I supposed to tell Jake? What am I supposed to tell his family? His parents think they're marrying their son to the daughter of a 9/11's hero. You tell them the truth." "Which is what, exactly?" "That my father was a lying, cheating coward who died while running away from his pregnant wife." Hearing it said out loud like that, so bluntly and cruelly, made me flinch. But Emma wasn't wrong. "The truth is that your father was a flawed human being who made terrible choices," I said carefully. "The truth is that his choices don't define you. The truth is that you're a remarkable young woman, not because of who your father was, but because of who you chose to become." Emma laughed bitterly. "That's very philosophical, Mom, but it doesn't change the fact that my entire identity is built on a lie. It doesn't change the fact that everyone in this town is going to find out that the hero they've been honoring for 23 years was actually just a selfish bastard." She was spiraling now, and I could see the full magnitude of what I'd done by keeping this from her. Emma wasn't just grieving the loss of her heroic father, she was grieving the loss of herself, the version of herself that had been shaped by pride and inspiration and a sense of inherited nobility. "Emma, listen to me," I said, moving to sit beside her. "You are not your father. Your worth doesn't come from his actions, good or bad. You're kind because you choose to be kind. You're strong because you've faced challenges and overcome them. You're brilliant because you work hard and think critically. None of that has anything to do with David, but it does," Emma cried. "Every choice I've made, every value I hold, every time I've tried to be a good person, I was trying to honor his memory. I was trying to be worthy of being his daughter." I pulled her into my arms. Then, this grown woman, who was suddenly my little girl again, broken and confused and needing her mother to make sense of a senseless world. "You were always worthy," I whispered into her hair. "You were always enough. You don't need a heroic father to justify your existence. You justify it all by yourself, just by being who you are." We sat like that for a long time, holding each other while the truth settled between us like a heavy blanket. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean while inside we tried to figure out how to rebuild our lives from the rubble of a 23-year-old lie. Finding Michelle Torres took exactly 17 minutes on the internet. Emma, despite being devastated by the truth about her father, still possessed the same methodical research skills that had first uncovered inconsistencies in David's story years earlier. Michelle Torres, age 54, works as a marketing director for a publishing company in Manhattan. Emma read from her laptop screen. Lives alone, in the same Upper East Side building where Dad was sending those love letters. We drove to Manhattan the following Tuesday, both of us needing answers that only Michelle could provide. The city felt different now that I understood David's connection to it, no longer the site of his heroic sacrifice, but the location of his secret life. Michelle's building was exactly what I'd expected, elegant, expensive, the kind of place David must have fantasized about living. The doorman was polite but firm about not letting us up without an announcement. "Tell her it's about David Mitchell," I said, my heart pounding. "Tell her his widow and daughter need to speak with her." We waited in the marble lobby for 20 minutes before Michelle appeared. I recognized her immediately from the photographs. Though 23 years had softened her features and added silver to her dark hair, she was still beautiful, still had the kind of effortless elegance that made me understand why David had been attracted to her. "Mrs. Mitchell," her voice was quiet, uncertain. "I wasn't sure this day would ever come. This is Emma," I said, gesturing to my daughter, who was staring at Michelle with undisguised curiosity. "David's daughter." Michelle's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Emma. "You look just like him. The same eyes, the same stubborn chin." She paused, collecting herself. "Would you like to come up? I think we have a lot to talk about." Michelle's apartment was tasteful and comfortable, filled with books and artwork and the kind of sophisticated touches that had always intimidated me about city living. She made coffee with shaking hands while Emma and I sat on her cream-colored sofa, surrounded by the life David had wanted to be part of. "I've thought about contacting you so many times over the years," Michelle said, settling into a chair across from us, "especially when I saw the newspaper articles about David being a 9/11's hero. But I didn't know how to tell you the truth without destroying everything, so you just let us live a lie." Emma's voice was sharp, accusatory. "Emma," I warned gently. "No, she's right to be angry," Michelle said. "I was a coward. I took the easy way out by staying silent." "Tell us about my father," Emma said, leaning forward. "Tell us who he really was." Michelle was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. "David was complicated. He was charming and funny and incredibly intelligent. But he was also deeply unhappy in his marriage, and he didn't know how to deal with that honestly." I felt my defenses rising. "Our marriage was fine. Sarah, I'm not trying to hurt you more than I already have. But David talked about feeling trapped, about marrying too young and never having the chance to figure out who he really was." "When did it start?" I asked, needing to understand the timeline of my own betrayal. "We met in January 2001 at a financial seminar in Manhattan. I was working for a small investment firm then, and David was there representing his accounting company. We talked afterward, went for coffee, and..." Michelle shrugged helplessly. "There was an immediate connection, and you knew he was married. He told me on our second date. He also told me he wasn't happy, that he'd been thinking about separation for years but didn't know how to leave." Emma made a disgusted sound. "Classic cheating husband excuse." "You're right," Michelle said simply. "It was, but I was 31, single, and I'd never felt that kind of connection with anyone before. I convinced myself that if he was really unhappy, I was actually helping him find the courage to be honest about it. But he was never honest about it," I said. "He kept us both in the dark." Michelle nodded, tears starting to flow. "The pregnancy changed everything. When David told me you were having a baby, he said he couldn't leave while you were pregnant, but he also couldn't stop seeing me. So we made plans." "What kind of plans?" "He was going to wait until after the baby was born, until you were settled and had support, and then he was going to ask for a divorce. We'd already found a lawyer, started looking at apartments we could afford together. I thought about the $47,000 David had saved in his secret account. He was planning to leave right after Emma was born." "Not right after. He wanted to make sure you were okay, that you had help with the baby. David wasn't a monster, Sarah. He was just weak. He wanted everyone to be happy, which meant no one could be completely happy." Emma had been silent through this exchange, but now she spoke up. "What was he like with you? Was he different?" Michelle smiled sadly. "He was lighter with me, more relaxed. He talked about dreams he'd never shared with anyone, wanting to travel, to take risks, to live in the city. With me, he felt like he could be the person he'd always wanted to be, instead of the person he thought he should be." "So, our life together, our marriage, that was all an act?" I asked. "Not an act," Michelle said carefully, "but maybe not his authentic self either. David loved you, Sarah. He talked about you all the time, about how kind and strong you were, how you deserved better than a husband who wasn't fully committed. If he loved me so much, why was he planning to leave? Because he loved me differently. And he was 23 when you got married. He'd never had the chance to figure out what he really wanted from life." Emma leaned back on the sofa, processing this information. "So on September 11th, he was driving to you." Michelle nodded. "He called me around 7 that morning, said he was coming into the city early because something big was happening and he wanted to make sure I was safe. The first plane had already hit by then, but you weren't near the World Trade Center." "No, I lived 60 blocks away. There was never any real danger to me. But David was panicked, said he needed to see me, to make sure I was okay. So he died driving to his mistress while his pregnant wife sat at home watching the towers fall," Emma said bitterly. "Emma," I started. "It's okay," Michelle interrupted. "She has every right to be angry. You both do." Michelle stood up and walked to a bookshelf, returning with a small wooden box. "I've kept these for 23 years, not knowing what to do with them." Inside the box were more love letters from David, handwritten on his company letterhead during lunch breaks and stolen moments at work. But there were other things too, ticket stubs from movies they'd seen together, receipts from restaurants, and, at the bottom, a small velvet jewelry box. "He gave me this the night before he died," Michelle said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold necklace with a small diamond pendant. "He said it was a promise that we'd have a real future together after everything got sorted out." I stared at the necklace, another symbol of David's secret life, another thing he'd bought for someone else with money that should have been ours. "I should have given this back years ago," Michelle continued, "along with everything else, but I loved him, and these were all I had left of him." "Keep them," I said, surprising myself. "They belong to you more than they belong to us." Emma looked at me sharply. "Mom, she loved him too. Maybe she loved the real him, the him he couldn't be with us. These things are part of her grief, too." Michelle began crying in earnest then, 23 years of suppressed sorrow finally finding release. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm sorry for the affair. I'm sorry for keeping quiet. I'm sorry that he died before any of us could figure out how to handle the situation honestly." "Michelle," I said gently, "did you love him?" "So much," she whispered. "I loved him so much, it scared me. And when he died, I felt like I lost my future too. But I also felt guilty for grieving, because he wasn't really mine to grieve for." I understood that feeling. I'd been grieving a man who wasn't really mine either, the heroic David who'd existed only in other people's stories. "What happened to you after?" Emma asked. "After he died, I moved to Boston for a few years. Couldn't bear to be in the city where we'd been together. When I came back, I thought about reaching out to you so many times, but how do you call someone and say hi? I was sleeping with your husband and he was planning to leave you for me." "You don't," I said. "But maybe you could have said, I knew your husband, and I have some things that belonged to him." Michelle nodded. "You're right. I should have found a way. I was just scared and selfish." And after a while it seemed like too much time had passed. We sat in Michelle's apartment for 3 hours, piecing together the final months of David's life from 2 very different perspectives. She told us about his dreams and fears, his plans for the future he'd never have. I told her about the man I'd married, the father he'd been preparing to become, the life he'd been planning to abandon. When we finally left, Michelle walked us to the elevator. "Emma," she said, "I want you to know that your father talked about you constantly. He was so excited about becoming a dad, so worried about being good enough for you. Whatever his flaws, whatever mistakes he made, he was going to love you completely." Emma nodded but didn't respond. In the elevator down, she was quiet until we reached the lobby. "Do you think he would have gone through with it?" she asked as we stepped onto the street. "Do you think he really would have left us?" I considered the question as we walked toward our car. "I don't know, sweetheart. I think he was planning to, but I also think he might have lost his nerve when it came time to actually do it. So we'll never really know what kind of man he was." "No," I agreed. "We'll never know. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the real David was somewhere in between the hero everyone said he was and the coward I'm afraid he might have been. Maybe he was just human." As we drove home to New Jersey, I thought about Michelle sitting alone in her elegant apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a love affair that had ended in tragedy. She'd carried David's secrets for 23 years, just as I'd carried his fabricated heroism. Now, finally, we were all free to grieve the man he actually was instead of the man we'd needed him to be. The Millbrook Town Council met every second Tuesday of the month in the basement of the municipal building, a windowless room with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs that had seen better decades. I'd never attended a council meeting before, but after 2 weeks of sleepless nights following our meeting with Michelle, I knew what I had to do. I'd called ahead and gotten myself added to the agenda under public comments. The town clerk, Mrs. Patterson, had seemed surprised. "Sarah, honey, what could you possibly need to address the council about?" "Is this about the flower shop permits?" "It's about the David Mitchell Memorial," I'd said simply. Word traveled fast in a small town. By Tuesday evening, the basement meeting room was packed beyond capacity. People lined the walls and crowded in the doorway, drawn by whispered rumors that something significant was going to happen regarding their beloved local hero. I saw familiar faces everywhere, neighbors who had brought casseroles after David's death, church members who had contributed to Emma's college fund, teachers who had used David's story to inspire their students about courage and sacrifice. Mayor Rodriguez sat at the council table, the same man who had dedicated the memorial plaque 22 years earlier. Emma had wanted to come with me, but I'd asked her to wait at home. This was something I needed to do alone, for both of us. The chair recognizes Sarah Mitchell, Mayor Rodriguez said when my time came. His voice was warm, respectful, the tone he'd always used when speaking to the widow of Millbrook's greatest hero. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking as I gripped the folder of documents I'd brought. The room fell completely silent. Thank you, Mayor Rodriguez. Members of the council, neighbors, friends. I paused, looking around the room at faces I'd known for decades. I'm here tonight to talk about the memorial to my husband, David Mitchell, and to share some information that I believe the community has a right to know. I could see confusion rippling through the crowd. Mrs. Chen, who had organized the original memorial fund, leaned forward in her chair. 23 years ago, this community rallied around my family in the most incredible way. You honored my husband's memory, supported my daughter and me, and created a beautiful memorial to commemorate his sacrifice on September 11th. Your kindness and generosity carried us through the darkest period of our lives. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the room. People smiled, remembering their own contributions to our family's healing. However, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I recently learned some information that changes everything we thought we knew about David's death. The murmurs stopped. The room became so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. David did not die in the World Trade Center attacks. He was never in Manhattan that day. He died in a single-car accident on Maple Street at approximately 8:30 that morning, more than an hour before the first plane hit the towers. The silence exploded into chaos. People shouted questions, gasped in disbelief, turned to their neighbors for confirmation of what they'd just heard. Mayor Rodriguez banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Furthermore, I said, raising my voice above the commotion, the story of David's heroism was fabricated by well-meaning individuals who thought they were protecting me from a more painful truth. That's impossible. Someone shouted from the back of the room. There were witnesses. There were newspaper articles. The newspaper articles were based on false information, I replied calmly. And there were no witnesses to David's supposed heroic actions because those actions never occurred. Mrs. Chen stood up, her face flushed with anger. Sarah Mitchell, how dare you come here and dishonor your husband's memory? David was a hero. This whole town knows it. Mrs. Chen, I understand your anger. I lived with that same belief for 20 years, but believing something doesn't make it true. I pulled out copies of the documents I'd discovered and held them up. I have police reports, employment records, and other evidence that prove David was never at the World Trade Center. I also have evidence that explains why he was driving toward Manhattan that morning, and it had nothing to do with business or heroism. Pastor Williams rose from his seat near the front. Sarah, even if there are discrepancies in the details, the important thing is that David's story has inspired countless people. Does it really matter exactly how he died if his memory has done so much good? Yes, Pastor Williams, it matters. It matters because it's not true. It matters because this community has built monuments and raised money and told stories based on a lie. It matters because my daughter has built her entire identity around being the child of a hero who never existed. The room erupted again. I heard someone yell shame, while another voice shouted, let her speak. Mayor Rodriguez was banging his gavel frantically, threatening to clear the room. If I may continue, I said, waiting for quiet. I'm not here to embarrass anyone or to cause pain. I'm here because this community deserves the truth. And because the memorial fund that was raised in David's name was collected under false pretenses. Councilman Bradley, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. Mrs. Mitchell, are you saying the memorial should be removed? I'm saying the community needs to decide what to do with the knowledge that the memorial is based on fiction. I'm also saying that the money raised in David's name should be returned to donors or redirected to actual 9/11's families who deserve that support. The crowd was getting angrier. I could see people whispering furiously to each other, some shaking their heads in denial, others looking stunned and confused. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly church organist, stood up slowly. Sarah dear, are you having some kind of breakdown? You've been under so much stress with Emma's wedding planning. Perhaps you should speak to someone professional before making these kinds of accusations. I'm not having a breakdown, Mrs. Patterson. I'm telling the truth. But the police confirmed David's heroism, called out Mr. Bradley from the hardware store. Officer Martinez told us what happened. Officer Martinez lied to protect me from learning that David was having an affair and planning to leave his pregnant wife. Gasps echoed through the room. Someone in the back shouted, "That's enough." But I continued, "The truth is that David died while driving to meet his mistress in Manhattan. He'd been planning to divorce me after our daughter was born. The heroic story was created to spare me that knowledge, and to give the community something noble to believe in during a time of national tragedy." Mayor Rodriguez had stopped banging his gavel. The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, shocked, processing, angry. "I have documentation to support everything I'm saying," I continued. "Police reports, employment, records, evidence of David's affair. I'm not here to destroy anyone's faith or to take away something beautiful. But I can't continue living a lie, and I can't let my daughter continue building her life on false foundations." Councilwoman Martinez, Officer Martinez's daughter, I realized, spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Mitchell, assuming what you're saying is true, what exactly are you asking the council to do?" "I'm asking you to acknowledge the truth publicly. I'm asking you to work with me to determine how to handle the memorial and the funds that were raised. And I'm asking this community to understand that sometimes the truth is more important than a beautiful lie." The meeting devolved into chaos. After that, people shouted questions and accusations, some demanding proof, others insisting I was mistaken or mentally unstable. A few people walked out, in disgust, while others crowded around the council table demanding answers. Mayor Rodriguez finally called a recess and asked me to meet privately with the council in an adjacent room. For 20 minutes, I showed them the documents, answered their questions, and watched their faces transform from skepticism to reluctant acceptance. "Sarah," the mayor said finally, "if this is true, and the evidence certainly suggests it is, this is going to devastate our community. David's story has been part of Millbrook's identity for over 2 decades. I know, but living a lie has been devastating too. Not just for me and Emma, but for everyone who's been unknowingly perpetuating fiction." When I finally left the municipal building that night, word was already spreading through town. My phone started ringing before I reached my car, and continued ringing all the way home. Some calls were supportive, others accusatory, many simply confused. Emma was waiting for me in the kitchen, along with Jake, who had driven up from Princeton when Emma called him in tears during the meeting. "How did it go?" Emma asked. "About as well as you'd expect when you tell an entire community that their beloved hero story is based on lies." Jake, who had been quiet since arriving, finally spoke. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything for Emma and me. I fell in love with her, not with her father's story. I looked at this young man who would soon be my son-in-law, who was choosing to stand by Emma even as her family's foundation crumbled. Thank you, Jake. That means more than you know." Over the next few days, the truth spread through Millbrook like wildfire. Some people accepted it with sad resignation, others rejected it entirely, and many fell. Somewhere in between, the local newspaper ran a front-page story, Local 9/11's hero story, called into question by widows' new evidence. The memorial in the park became a focal point of controversy. Some people left flowers and notes of support, while others demanded its immediate removal. Someone spray-painted LIAR across the bronze plaque, which was cleaned off by morning but left everyone shaken. The truth was messy and painful, but it was finally out. After 23 years of living in the shadow of a fictional hero, my family was free to grieve. The real man David had been flawed, complicated, and ultimately human. And for the first time since that terrible September morning, I felt like I could finally breathe. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and old books, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and windows that overlooked downtown Millbrook. Attorney Rebecca Walsh, no relation to Jennifer Walsh, from the Benefits office had handled estate planning for half the town for the past 15 years. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, spreading documents across her mahogany desk, "you're in a very unusual legal situation. Memorial fraud isn't something I encounter often in family law." Emma and I sat across from her, surrounded by bankers' boxes filled with evidence of the memorial fund's financial history. After the town council meeting, several people had demanded a full accounting of where the money had gone and whether any laws had been broken. The memorial fund raised approximately $127,000 over the past 23 years, Rebecca continued, consulting her notes. That includes the initial donations in 2001, plus ongoing contributions for maintenance, flowers, And the scholarship fund, $127,000, Emma repeated quietly. All raised under false pretenses. That's the legal question we need to address. Were the donations obtained fraudulently, or were they given in good faith based on information that later proved incorrect? I thought about all the fundraisers over the years. The church bake sales, the high school car washes, the annual memorial runs. Hundreds of people had contributed, believing they were honoring a genuine hero. Most of the donors weren't part of the original deception, I said. They were told the same story everyone else was told. But some people knew the truth, Emma added. The police officers, the coroner, probably others. They accepted donations knowing the memorial was based on lies. Rebecca nodded. That's where it gets complicated. Officer Martinez and the others could potentially face charges for fraud, depending on their level of involvement and intent. But proving intent after 23 years will be difficult. She pulled out a thick folder. I've been in touch with the district attorney's office. They're interested in the case, but they're also aware of the public sentiment. About half the town still refuses to believe David's heroic story was false. What does that mean for us? I asked. It means that if this goes to trial, it becomes a public spectacle. Every detail of David's affair, every aspect of his planned abandonment of your family, becomes part of the public record. The media attention could be intense. I shuddered at the thought. Bad enough that our small town knew the truth, having it become a national story would be unbearable. There's another consideration, Rebecca continued. Some of the Memorial Fund money went toward the David Mitchell Scholarship Program. 3 students have received grants totaling $18,000 over the past 5 years. Do we ask them to return that money? Emma and I exchanged glances. Those students, kids like Jennifer, who'd volunteered at soup kitchens and demonstrated real community service, didn't deserve to be punished for adults' lies. What are our options? Emma asked. Several. We could pursue full criminal charges against everyone who knowingly participated in the deception. We could demand complete restitution of all funds. We could work with the town to redirect the money to legitimate 9/11's charities. Or, we could let sleeping dogs lie and move on with your lives. The legal meeting was interrupted by Rebecca's secretary, who announced that Officer Martinez was in the waiting room, requesting to speak with us. He's been here for an hour, she said, quietly. He says he won't leave until you agree to see him. Martinez looked like he'd aged a decade since I'd confronted him at his house. His face was drawn, his hands shaky, as he sat across from us in Rebecca's conference room. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to know that I never took a penny from those memorial funds, he said without preamble. Not me, not Thompson, not anyone else who was involved in the original decision. But you let people donate money based on lies, Emma said coldly. Yes. And I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I want you to understand something. By the time the donations started pouring in, the story had taken on a life of its own. People wanted to believe it. They needed to believe it. So you just let them. Martinez rubbed his face with both hands. Mrs. Mitchell, in 42 years of police work, I've seen enough real evil to last 10 lifetimes. When I had the chance to let people believe in something good, something heroic, during the worst week in American history. Yes, I let them, even though it was built on lies. Even though it was built on lies. He looked directly at me. Sarah, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I need you to understand that every person who donated to that memorial fund got exactly what they paid for. What do you mean? They paid to honor sacrifice and heroism. They paid to support a family who lost someone on 9/11s. They paid to feel like they were part of something meaningful during a time when the world felt meaningless. Martinez leaned forward. The fact that David wasn't actually a hero doesn't change what those donations meant to the people who gave them. Rebecca intervened. Officer Martinez, are you here in some official capacity? I'm here as someone who made a mistake 23 years ago and wants to make it right. I'm prepared to take full responsibility for the deception. If charges are filed, I won't fight them. What about the others who were involved? Thompson died 3 years ago. The coroner is in a nursing home with dementia. The tow truck driver moved to Florida. I'm the only one left who can be held accountable, and I'm ready to be. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 23 years of consequences settling around us. Officer Martinez, I said finally, what do you think we should do about the memorial fund? I think you should donate it to real 9/11's families. I think you should let those scholarship kids keep their money. They earned it fair and square. And I think you should decide whether destroying me serves any purpose other than revenge. After Martinez left, Rebecca laid out our options more clearly. The district attorney was willing to pursue fraud charges if we insisted, but the case would be difficult to prove and devastating to everyone involved. The community was already divided enough without a criminal trial. What's your recommendation? I asked. Personally, I think you redirect the memorial funds to legitimate 9/11's charities. Keep the scholarship program but rename it, and focus on moving forward rather than punishing people for a 23-year-old decision made during a national crisis. Emma had been quiet through most of the meeting, but now she spoke up. Mom, what do you want to do? I thought about Martinez, sitting in his living room with the weight of guilt and regret written across his face. I thought about the donors who'd given money in good faith, trying to honor what they believed was a heroic sacrifice. I thought about the scholarship recipients who'd done nothing wrong except accept help with their education. I want justice, I said slowly, but I also want to heal. And I'm not sure those two things are the same in this situation. We left Rebecca's office with a plan. The memorial fund would be divided 3 ways: 1/3 to legitimate 9/11's family organizations, 1/3 to continue the scholarship program under a new name honoring community service rather than David specifically, and 1/3 returned to donors who requested it. The memorial plaque would be replaced with one that honestly commemorated the community's response to 9/11's. Without mentioning David specifically, and Officer Martinez would face no criminal charges, though he agreed to public acknowledgement of his role in the deception. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was honest resolution. And after 23 years of living with lies, honesty felt like the most important thing of all. As we drove home from the lawyer's office, Emma asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you think we did the right thing? I think we did the human thing, I replied. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for. The therapist's office felt like a sanctuary after months of legal meetings and community confrontations. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, thankfully specialized in family trauma and had experience with clients whose lives had been upended by devastating revelations. Grief is complicated under the best circumstances, Dr. Chen said during our first joint session. When you're grieving someone who turned out to be different than you thought, it becomes exponentially more complex. Emma sat curled in the corner of the oversized couch, still processing everything that had happened since February. It was now late April, and the emotional toll of the past few months was evident in the dark circles under her eyes and the way she seemed to fold in on herself. I feel like I'm grieving to different people, Emma said quietly. The father I thought I had, and the father I actually had, but I don't know how to grieve someone I never really knew. That's a very normal response, Dr. Chen replied. You're dealing with what we call ambiguous loss, mourning someone who's gone, while simultaneously mourning the person you thought they were. I had my own grief to process. 23 years of marriage to a man who had been planning to leave me. 23 years of believing I was the widow of a hero when I was actually the woman someone had tried to abandon. Sometimes I feel angry at David, I admitted. Not just for the affair, but for dying before we could resolve anything. For leaving me to clean up his mess and figure out who he really was. Anger is appropriate, Dr. Chan said. You have every right to be furious with him for his choices and for the position those choices put you in. But sometimes I feel guilty for being angry at a dead person. Dead people don't get special immunity from accountability just because they're gone. David's death doesn't erase the impact of his actions on your life and Emma's life. Over the following weeks, Emma and I began the slow work of rebuilding our understanding of ourselves and our family. It wasn't easy. Some days, Emma would wake up and for a split second forget that everything had changed, then have to re-experience the loss all over again. I had this dream last night that Dad was walking me down the aisle, she told me one morning over coffee. In the dream, he was proud of me, talking about how I'd inherited his sense of justice and courage. Then I woke up and remembered that those traits came from somewhere else entirely. They came from you. They came from choices you made and values you developed. But how do I know that? How do I know which parts of my personality are authentically mine, and which parts were just me trying to live up to a fictional father? Dr. Chen helped us work through these questions in family sessions and individual therapy. She gave us tools for processing complex grief and techniques for rebuilding our identities separate from David's story. Emma, she said during one session. Tell me about a time when you helped someone, but don't mention your father or his supposed heroism. Emma thought for a moment. When I was 14, there was a new girl at school, Melissa, who didn't speak English very well. Kids were making fun of her accent and excluding her from everything. I started eating lunch with her and helping her with homework, not because I thought about what Dad would do, but because I could see she was lonely and scared. What motivated you to reach out to her? I just... I couldn't stand seeing someone be treated that way. It felt wrong. That instinct to protect vulnerable people, where do you think that came from? Emma was quiet for a long time. From me, I guess. From seeing unfairness and not being able to ignore it. Slowly, session by session, Emma began to reclaim her own moral compass. She started to see that her kindness, her integrity, her drive to help others weren't inherited traits from a heroic father, but choices she'd made consistently throughout her life. The wedding planning resumed in May, but with a different energy. Emma had initially wanted to postpone everything, feeling like she couldn't celebrate while her entire identity was in flux. But Jake, with his characteristic gentle persistence, convinced her that their love story didn't need to be delayed by her father's deceptions. We're not getting married to honor your dad's memory, Jake pointed out. We're getting married because we want to build a life together. Emma's approach to the wedding changed dramatically. Instead of the elaborate celebration we'd been planning, she wanted something smaller, more intimate, more authentic to who she and Jake actually were rather than who she'd thought she should be as the daughter of a hero. I want our wedding to be about us, she told me, as we revised the guest list for the third time, not about living up to some legacy or making statements about honor and sacrifice. Just about two people who love each other wanting to make that official. The venue changed from the expensive country club to Jake's parents' backyard. The elaborate floral arrangements I'd planned were replaced with simple garden flowers. The expensive band was replaced with a string quartet from the local college. Are you disappointed? Emma asked as we toured the much simpler setup. I know you wanted to give me a princess wedding. I wanted to give you the wedding you wanted, I replied honestly. And this is more beautiful because it's actually you. The biggest change was the father-daughter dance. We'd agonized over what song would have represented David's relationship with Emma, finally settling on In My Daughter's Eyes because it captured how she'd always seen him. But now, that song felt like a monument to a lie. I don't want a father-daughter dance, Emma announced one evening in therapy. I want a mother-daughter dance instead. It was a simple statement, but it represented a seismic shift. Emma was choosing to honor the parent who had actually been there, who had actually sacrificed for her, who had actually shaped her into the woman she'd become. What song? I asked, feeling unexpectedly emotional. I was thinking You'll Be in My Heart by Phil Collins, because you have been, Mom, through everything. You've been the constant. You've been the hero. I started crying right there in Dr. Chen's office, overwhelmed by the recognition I'd never realized I needed. For 23 years, I'd felt like a supporting character in David's heroic story. But Emma was right. I'd been the one who stayed, who sacrificed, who built a life for us from nothing. As Emma's wedding day approached, I found myself feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades, pride in my own strength. Not pride in being the widow of a hero, but pride in being a woman who had raised an incredible daughter largely on her own, who had built a successful business, who had survived devastating betrayal and emerged stronger. You know what's funny? Emma said during one of our final therapy sessions. I spent my whole life trying to be worthy of Dad's heroism. But now I realize I want to be worthy of your resilience. That's a much better goal. Dr. Chen smiled. How does it feel to have your own hero story instead of trying to live up to someone else's? Scary, Emma admitted, but also freeing, like I can finally stop performing and just be myself. The work wasn't finished. Grief and identity reconstruction don't happen in a few months of therapy, but as summer approached and Emma's wedding drew near, we both felt like we were finally living our own lives instead of lives shaped by other people's lies and expectations. For the first time in 23 years, the future felt like it belonged to us. Emma's wedding day dawned clear and warm, with the kind of golden September light that makes everything look like it's been touched by magic. The Chen family's backyard had been transformed into an intimate garden party, with white chairs arranged in curved rows and Emma's simple floral arrangements creating a pathway to the altar Jake's father had built from reclaimed wood. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the final preparations, and felt a profound sense of peace. This wedding looked nothing like the elaborate celebration we'd originally planned, but it was perfect in ways that had nothing to do with expense or grandeur. Emma appeared beside me, radiant in her simple ivory dress, not the $4,000 princess gown from Manhattan, but a vintage-inspired design she'd found at a local boutique for $300. She looked like herself, confident and authentic and genuinely happy for the first time in months. "No regrets?" I asked, squeezing her hand. "None," she said firmly. "This is what I want. This is who we are." The ceremony was small, just 60 guests instead of the 200 we'd originally invited. But everyone there genuinely loved Emma and Jake, and the intimacy made every moment feel more meaningful. When Pastor Williams asked who gave Emma in marriage, my brother Mark and I answered together, "Her family does, with love and joy." There was no empty chair with David's photo, no moment of silence for the fallen hero, father. Instead, there was simply the celebration of two young people beginning their life together, surrounded by people who loved them for who they actually were. The reception was held in the same backyard, with string lights overhead and tables arranged casually on the lawn. During dinner, Jake's father offered a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "Emma and Jake," he said, raising his glass, "your love story proves that the best foundations are built on truth, honesty, and genuine affection. May you always choose authentic happiness over perfect appearances." When it came time for the mother-daughter dance, I walked onto the small dance floor with my heart full of emotions I couldn't name. Phil Collins' voice filled the garden as Emma and I swayed together, and I whispered the words I'd been saving for this moment. "I'm so proud of you, Em, not because of who your father was or wasn't, but because of who you chose to become. I couldn't have done it without you. Mom, you taught me that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up and rebuilding something better." As we danced, I caught sight of my business cards tucked into my purse, the new ones I'd had printed just that week. Sarah Mitchell, Truth and Healing Grief Counseling. After months of therapy with Dr. Chen, I'd discovered a calling I never knew I had, helping other people navigate the complex grief that comes with devastating revelations about loved ones. "You know," Emma said, following my gaze, "I think Dad would actually be proud of what you're doing now. The counseling practice, I mean. Do you really think so?" "I think the best version of Dad, the one who existed somewhere underneath all the lies and deception, would be amazed by the woman you've become. You turned his betrayal into purpose. That's pretty heroic." I held my daughter closer. This remarkable young woman, who had found a way to forgive her father's failings while still holding him accountable, who had chosen truth over comfortable fiction, who had taught me that heroism isn't about grand gestures in moments of crisis, but about daily choices to live authentically and with integrity. The party continued late into the evening, with dancing and laughter and the kind of joy that can only come from genuine celebration. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, Emma and Jake stood at the edge of the garden, looking out at their future with eyes clear of illusion. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jake said, pulling me aside, "thank you for raising the most incredible woman I've ever met. And thank you for showing both of us that truth is always better than beautiful lies." After the last guest left and the cleanup was finished, I sat alone in my own backyard, still wearing my mother-of-a-bride dress, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 2 years ago, I'd been living a fiction that defined every aspect of my life. Today, my daughter had married the love of her life in a celebration built entirely on authentic foundations. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michelle Torres. "Saw the wedding photos on Emma's Instagram. She looks beautiful and happy. I hope you both have found peace with the truth." I thought about responding, then decided some chapters were better left closed. Michelle had played her role in our story, but this new beginning belonged to Emma and Jake and me. Over the following months, my grief counseling practice grew steadily. I discovered that there were more people than I'd imagined dealing with similar situations. Children who'd learned their deceased parents weren't who they'd thought. Spouses who'd discovered affairs or secret lives after funerals. Families whose idealized memories had been shattered by evidence or testimony. "The hardest part," one client told me during a session, "is figuring out how to grieve someone you loved when you're not sure you knew them at all." "The person you loved was real," I replied, sharing what I'd learned through my own painful journey. Maybe not complete, maybe not honest, but the moments of genuine connection you had were real. You can grieve those moments while still acknowledging the deception. Emma visited often during her first year of marriage, sometimes bringing Jake, sometimes coming alone to sit in my kitchen and process the ongoing work of rebuilding her sense of self. We'd developed a new tradition of honesty, no more comfortable lies, no more protecting each other from difficult truths. "I've been thinking about having kids," Emma told me one autumn afternoon, "but I'm scared about what kind of stories I'll tell them about their grandfather." "Tell them the truth," I said. "Tell them he was a complex person who made both good and bad choices. Tell them that people are rarely all hero or all villain, and that the most important thing is to learn from both the good and bad examples we're given. And if they ask why he was planning to leave us, tell them that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they love, and that understanding those choices doesn't mean we have to excuse them or repeat them." On the second anniversary of David's real death, September 11, 2025, Emma and I visited his grave for the first time since learning the truth. His headstone still bore the dates and the inscription, "Beloved Husband and Father," which felt more honest now than it had when we'd chosen those words 24 years earlier. "I forgive you," Emma said quietly, placing a simple bouquet of daisies on the grave. "Not because what you did was okay, but because carrying anger about your choices isn't serving my life." I knelt beside her and placed my own flowers, white roses from my shop. "I forgive you too, and I forgive myself for not asking harder questions sooner." As we walked back to the car, Emma linked her arm through mine. "Mom, do you think we're heroes now, for surviving all this and coming out stronger?" I considered the question as we drove through Millbrook, past the park where David's memorial had been replaced with a simple plaque honoring community resilience in times of crisis, past the flower shop where I built a business from nothing, past the house where I'd raised an incredible daughter largely on my own. "I think we're something better than heroes," I said finally. "We're real people who chose truth over fiction, growth over stagnation, and love over bitterness. We're people who learned that you don't need a perfect story to have a meaningful life." Emma smiled and squeezed my hand. "I like that better than being a hero anyway. Heroes are expected to be perfect. Real people get to be complicated and still worthy of love." As we pulled into my driveway, I thought about the long journey from that February morning when a phone call had shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The truth had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. For the first time in 24 years, I was living my own story instead of someone else's fiction. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table working on case notes for my grief counseling clients, and my eyes fell on David's coffee mug, still sitting in its place on the counter after all these years. "World's greatest dad," it proclaimed. And for the first time since learning the truth, I smiled when I looked at it. David had been many things: a husband, a father to be, a man who made terrible choices, a person who died before he could face the consequences of those choices. But the mug didn't lie. In those brief months before Emma was born, in his excitement about becoming a father, in whatever genuine love he'd felt for the daughter he would never meet, maybe he had been a great dad, or at least had the potential to be one. The difference was that now I could hold both truths simultaneously. David had loved Emma, and David had been planning to leave us. People are complex. Love is imperfect. Heroes are human. I picked up my phone and called Emma. "Mom, is everything okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just wanted to tell you something. I've been thinking about your question earlier, about whether we're heroes now. Yeah, I think the real heroism was never about what your father did or didn't do on September 11th. I think it was about what you did every day for 23 years, being kind, working hard, caring about other people, building a life based on love and integrity. That's heroism. That's what matters." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Thanks, Mom. I needed to hear that. And Emma, I'm proud to be your mother, not because of any story or legacy or dramatic moment, but because of the 1,000 small choices you make every day to be a good person." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd built from the ashes of a beautiful lie. Tomorrow, I would help more clients navigate their own complicated grief. Tomorrow, I would tend to flowers that would brighten someone's celebration or comfort someone's sorrow. Tomorrow, I would continue the work of living authentically, honestly, courageously. The truth had cost me everything I thought I knew about my past, but it had given me something more valuable: the freedom to write my own future. And that future uncertain as it was, belonged entirely to me. Sometimes the greatest act of heroism is simply surviving the truth and choosing to build something real from what remains. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is stop living someone else's story and start living your own. I was finally ready to be the hero of my own life.